Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the third Connecting the Heartland Workshop. I'm Angie Cooper, Chief Program Officer for Heartland Forward. For anyone who might be new to Heartland Forward's work, we like to describe ourselves as a think and do tank on a mission to improve the economic performance in the middle of the United States. Earlier this year, we launched a new campaign called Connecting the Heartland to High-Speed Internet Access. Our goal is to accelerate progress and bridge gaps that prevent states and communities from realizing their goals of universal connectivity. We host this virtual workshop series with Land O'Lakes and the National Urban League, two organizations doing amazing and outstanding work to make sure in every corner of America, from farming communities to dense urban areas, that everyone is able to participate in our digital economy. Our goal for this convening is to bring people together, to bring national leaders with state and local stakeholders to share insights and improve coordination. Today, we are focusing on the opportunity to leverage record federal resources to close the high-speed internet availability gap in unserved and underserved communities around the country. Like some of our other workshops, we will hear from some experts and leaders across the heartland. You'll first hear from top state broadband officials in Illinois and Ohio about their states and how they're preparing to take advantage of this moment and the resources that are coming to them at the state level. Then we will get that local perspective and hear from three mayors who have been working close to close the digital divide for their communities. And we'll round the workshop with Blair Levin, one of the country's leading experts in the role of government, in the role that government can play to close the digital divide. Okay, so I'm going to go a few housekeeping notes, and I know we all are familiar, but sometimes we forget. If you'd like to ask a question, be sure to throw it in your chat box, and we will make sure some of those questions get cycled throughout the session. We suggest that if you're watching today to select speaker view in the top right corner of your screen. We all know if you're not speaking, we please ask you to put yourself on mute. And then lastly, this event is being recorded, so please note that all comments are on the record. So let's get started. I would now like to hand things over to the very talented and becoming my really good friend at the state and local level, Kathryn Dewitt. Kathryn leads state's efforts and works closely as the head of the Broadband Access Initiative at the Pew Charitable Trust. Kathryn, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and I'm thrilled to be joining Heartland Forward again. Thank you for having me back. It's always nice to be invited back for these sessions. But I don't want to take up too much time with an introduction, but just for those in the audience who may not know me or my team's work, I am Kathryn Dewitt. I lead the Broadband Access Initiative at the Pew Charitable Trusts, and my team focuses almost exclusively on how states are bridging the digital divide. And we have the good fortune of working with state broadband programs across the country, including the states of Illinois and Ohio, who I am joined by here today. So, gentlemen, I will ask you to kick off our conversation by introducing yourselves and giving a very brief overview of your programmatic activities. And Peter, I am putting it to you first.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Voderberg. I am the chief of an organization called Broadband Ohio. We are an office inside of our Department of Development dedicated to bringing high-speed internet access to every Ohioan, regardless of where they happen to live. And to talk a little bit about what we're doing so far, I've only been around since March of last year. In fact, for the most part, I got hired and then COVID happened and I had to go home. So they were not related, but they were definitely things that happened right around the same time. And really, it brought to light how important it is to have broadband infrastructure all throughout the state and a lot of the gaps that we had. So a few things that we've done that I'd like to point out is we did a $50 million Broadband Ohio connectivity grant, which brought connectivity devices to students all across the state of Ohio. We had over 900 school districts apply for those monies to be able to put things into the hands of their students. We use some of that money to leverage some in-home connectivity in an area called Riverside. The Riverside Local School District is in Logan County, which is a very rural area, and they took the money that we had given them and actually did an in-home project with an ISP called PCs for People, and they were able to bring internet connectivity into their community by leveraging the infrastructure that was at the school buildings, and in doing so, they actually brought it down to $15 a month, which is a fantastic affordability play as well as an availability play. We were able to replicate that success in an urban and a suburban environment in East Cleveland and Middletown. But really the thing that has been most important to us is that we were able to pass legislation just this year that was signed in May by the governor that creates the Broadband Ohio, the Ohio Residential Broadband Expansion Grant, which is $250 million towards bringing high-speed internet access to unserved and underserved areas. So any area in the state of Ohio that is under 25 megabits per second download speed and 3 megabits per second upload speed is eligible to apply for those grants to be able to have a broadband internet provider come to them and actually provide internet for the first time. We fund the gap, and the gap is between how much it costs to actually do the project versus how much it costs to have the project be profitable. So basically, if a company comes in and says, I need to be able to make $2 million in 5 years, but I'm only going to make $1 million, they can ask for that $1 million difference. We are in the middle of an open application period right now, our first one ever. It opened on September 6th, which I know is a holiday, but we made it work. And basically, we have over 70 applications in the portal right now, and we're really excited to see where it goes. And that's a lot of information in a short amount of time. I'm going to hand it over to Matt.
Well, Peter, I'll try to play off of your energy here. I'm Matt Schmit. I'm the director of the Illinois Office of Broadband, also chair of the Illinois Broadband Advisory Council. We've been at our work in Illinois for 2 years now, and we're standing up our own Office of Broadband and what was at the time the country's largest state matching grant program for broadband infrastructure, $400 million. And so that takes us back to 2019. Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly made a historic investment in broadband infrastructure. And so our charge at the Office of Broadband is to administer and oversee the investment of those funds. And so our Connect Illinois grant program is built upon best practices that have been established across the country for the last decade or so, focusing on areas of unserved or underserved speeds. And so we've got round 2 that we'll be announcing here later this month, I believe, and then we'll be opening up our third round of funding, our notice of funding opportunity for additional $350 million, combining state and federal dollars towards that end. And so what we stress in Illinois is that the infrastructure investment is absolutely critical. It's something that every state should be doing, and we're so glad to see the federal investment taking place, but that's just the start of the conversation. And so we try to round out our work holistically, looking at like the 3 legs of the stool: access, adoption, utilization. And so we have an increasingly robust and complementary digital equity package that pairs with that infrastructure investment. We're looking at community planning and capacity building work through our Illinois Connecting Communities program, a collaboration with local philanthropy and the Illinois-based Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. We also have our Broadband Ready program focused on regional engagement for adoption and digital equity. In addition, we'll be standing up a statewide digital navigator program soon. And so the whole key here is that we started with infrastructure, but we recognize that we got to put our communities in a position to take advantage of funding, to really put themselves in a position to compete in the 21st century, and then focus on the kind of capacity building and digital literacy skills building that complements that infrastructure. And so I look forward to getting into more details, learning more about what Peter's doing in Ohio, but that's the intro for me.
That's really helpful, and thank you both for keeping it short, but also very detailed. One might think you do this for a living. So I want to dig in a little bit more to kind of what you both talked about a little bit with the kind of state-local coordination piece. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about about federal funds. And Peter, you mentioned that you have your first $250 million grant program from the state this year. Matt, you're getting ready to announce round 2 awards. And now we know $100 million from the Capital Projects Fund. And then if the infrastructure bill passes, that's another at least $100 million. So how are we, this is a lot of money, says the researcher, making the very obvious point. But so how are we thinking about this? Because to Matt's point, it's not just about infrastructure, but it does take quite a bit of work and organization and collaboration to scale these programs. So Matt, how are you thinking about scaling your current initiatives to manage incoming federal funds? And then Peter, we'll turn it over to you for your response as well.
Well, I really have to hand it to Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly for making that historic state investment back in 2019, the $400 million to stand up a competitive matching grant program at the state level. It's put us in a really good position to be talking about the sums of money and the kind of investment that we'll be making. We've been planning to move dollars in $50 million tranches, essentially. And so our first round of Connect Illinois investment was at that $50 million level. And so as we move forward with the federal dollars, I think that we've got a pretty good understanding of what it takes to review applications of that magnitude and to deploy the dollars, and then to pivot to the next round of funding and keep that cycle going. And so I think that that's the key for us right now, is just building off of the successes that we've had in standing up the Connect Illinois program. Scaling, I think, when it comes to the challenges that we might face, I think this is going to be around the country. You look at the supply chain, you look at delays in fiber or other inputs, you look at personnel and talent. I think 2 years ago, not every state was investing $100+ million in broadband. That's what's changed. And so I think that we just have to recognize that there will be some stresses on the supply chain, but we feel like we're well positioned to make these investments. And again, the idea is to take advantage of this moment, make the investments once, make them right, and then hopefully we're able to reap the benefits of this moving forward.
Okay, so you're thinking about tranching funds, and you're also considering the supply chain as well. So Peter, how about Ohio? How are y'all thinking about this?
Sure, relatively similarly. So we were, again, Governor DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Houston, the General Assembly passing our $250 million grant program. That's been a huge benefit for the state of Ohio in two ways. One, it's because we've actually put a lot of money into the investment that we think is necessary to be able to make sure that everyone has access to high-speed internet. But two, it's created a process, right? I think what's really helpful here is that it isn't just a grant program. We have an advisory board that exists as well that helps review applications. We have a process by which those applications come in, a timeline, a challenge process, and things like that. So as we're talking about getting some of these additional federal funds, it can be very easy to move them simply into the program that already exists, to be able to use that as the mechanism by which we get those dollars out the door. So we're still in our growing phase, right? Because this is our first round of doing it. So we're still learning many of the lessons that I'm sure Matt can explain that he learned the first time that he had to do it. But we're really excited about it. And we think that it's scalable because, again, what was important to us is having that process, having a process by which we know it's transparent, we know people can understand and get behind. And that's what we have from the legislation that was signed by Governor DeWine this year. So.
And Kathryn, I could add a point to that too that I didn't. And I think as states get a couple of funding rounds under their belts, they're going to know what a great project looks like. And that's certainly the case in Illinois. You know the projects that stand out. And so what we're trying to do moving forward is really remove the arbitrary deadlines for making announcements. And if there's a great project that comes to us, it scores really competitively, we're going to try to turn that around in 4 to 6 weeks if we can, just to get those dollars moving, to provide some certainty and allow that applicant that's put the time and the effort into providing a great application, the opportunity to get moving as soon as possible. And so I wouldn't necessarily advise that for all states right out of the gates, but I think that that's something that you can evolve to.
I would say that we certainly saw this in our research in states that, eventually you do kind of, states do figure out sort of what does work and what doesn't work. But I think to points that you were both making separately, a lot of that does come back to the operational structure and the other programmatic activities that states have in place. So whether that is the advisory council, whether it is local planning and capacity building, it is not just the grants that make these programs and these projects successful. It's all of these other activities that feed into the successful grants. So I appreciate both of you bringing that up. Selfishly, just thanks. Let's keep hitting those points. But on that state, on that local coordination piece, I think Matt, you just mentioned, scoring applications. Peter, you had talked about challenge processes as well. As localities and local leaders in particular think about engaging with state programs, thinking and they're wrapping their heads around the amount of federal funds that are coming their way. how should they think about collaborating with your state programs, or what can make for effective partnerships between state and local government? So, Peter, I don't mean to spring this on you, but I'm going to do that. So you can take first pass.
Sure. So no, and I appreciate the question. The DeWine Houston administration really values the public-private kind of partnership model. We want to have local and community buy-in, because we don't want to just do a project that we're, basically coming to a community and saying, hey, we're here to fix it, right? We want to understand the problem from the community's perspective. We want to understand what they need, what they want, and be able to try to accommodate that. So each of the programs that we've done to date have all been done with lots of collaboration from our locals. So the Riverside pilot project that I was talking about in Logan County, they used the state dollars that we already had. That was a collaboration between the school district who came to us and said, can you please help us? We have a telehealth pilot project in Muskegon Valley Educational Service Center that will serve up to 20,000 students. And that was a homegrown project where they came to us and they wanted to have community involvement. So we find that extremely important. In fact, for our scoring criteria, there are two things that I want to mention. One is that you actually get more points if you have collaborations with community involvement. So if you go ahead and have local support letters, whether it be economic development, whether it be county commissioners or municipalities or township trustees, as long as you can show us that there's a lot of community buy-in, you'll score better on our scoring criteria for that application. And second, the great thing that we have is that there's a program through our website where county commissioners can pass a resolution and then fill out a very short application and then have their resolution posted on our website so that we can help them start finding internet service providers that are local to be able to create those collaborations. So they're not just doing it on their own, right? They're not just kind of out there in the dark trying to figure out how to go forward with the project, but they can actually meet with internet service providers, and Broadband Ohio can help them do that. So those are some of the things that we're doing right now that really support collaboration, how that collaboration is so important to our process.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and I appreciate you contextualizing that for the audience. Matt, anything to add to that point?
Yeah, I would just emphasize the investment that states make in planning and community engagement, capacity building pays dividends. And so, in Illinois, we have our Illinois Connected Communities program that's by definition a collaboration with non-state actors. We will have engaged 20 individual communities by the end of the year. And our hope is to continue to build that momentum. The point that I would just stress for any local leaders or folks that are out there, now is the time to really lean into these opportunities, these conversations. A lot of times, historically, communities may have the energy and the vision to do something on the broadband front, but the real question or the unknown was, where's the funding going to come from? Well, we have historic investments in broadband. And so the funding question is largely addressed. And so now the real key is focusing on that capacity building, that planning, that engagement. To Peter's point, if it's a public-private partnership, finding that provider partner. And so as communities come to us, we try to provide as many resources as we can, point to a toolkit that's in development. And also we look forward to developing additional tools for communities, recognizing that you don't have to make a decision on the, in the fall here, whether or not to invest in broadband. You can take some time with these federal dollars, understand your options, and make sure that you make the right investment with those dollars for your community. And we think broadband is a really good option.
I think one thing, and I don't know if this has been your experience with your programs, one thing that we had heard from our field research with respect to the state capacity building for local leaders were that their private sector partners appreciated some of that education and capacity building that went on because it helped manage expectations, and it helped do some of that, again, education and training. So that way, by the time those partnerships really came together and those discussions were coming together, folks were coming to the table with an understanding of the art of the possible. It didn't fall on the providers to do that education for local leaders. It was already done. So I think in terms of, resulting in more productive partnerships and candidly, maybe more accelerated negotiations or getting to a faster outcome, those capacity building efforts can be, really important. I want to pivot for just a second because I would be remiss if I did not talk about the updated guidance that was released yesterday from the Department of Treasury on the Capital Projects Fund. And so whether we are looking at the Capital Projects Fund guidance or what is in the infrastructure bill. Can y'all touch on how you, as administrators of state, statutorily authorized funds with your own funding requirements and that are associated with those programs, how do those align with what Congress and federal agencies are setting forward? And how, at this point, are you navigating that? I don't actually know if either of you are able to answer that question at this point, but if you can, I'd appreciate it. Matt?
Well, I can just say in Illinois, our Connect Illinois program is designed intentionally around best practices that have been developed at the state level over the last decade. We've seen states invest in broadband, create offices of broadband, stand up grant programs, and through that effort, best practice has been established. And so when you look at the sorts of things that we see in Connect Illinois, that we see around the country, that we see in the Treasury guidance, the idea about technology neutrality, but also the focus on scalability and investing in an area once, and making sure that you've got the kind of investment, the kind of service, the infrastructure that's going to serve that community well into the years ahead. When you look at eligibility thresholds, in Illinois, we differentiate unserved and underserved, 25 by 3 for the unserved, 100 by 20 for the underserved accordingly. Any application that comes to us in an unserved or underserved area is eligible for funding. And we don't necessarily trust the maps that are out there, even our own. It's the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. And so the whole idea about targeting resources, beginning that conversation with potential applicants and communities and our providers about how we can partner together is really key. And then knowing full well that when the investments are made, that we are investing in a community, we're investing in an area for the long term, that we're taking it off the map, because what we're going to invest in is fully scalable for the needs, not only of today, but for tomorrow. And I think those are really important pieces that any state or federal program should recognize. And I'm just really glad to see the alignment, particularly with the Treasury and the Capital Projects Fund. Moving forward with the infrastructure bill, I think there may be a chance that the dollars are going to be more targeted towards unserved areas. And so that's something that we would take into account as we pair state dollars with federal dollars and try to fill in that map. Because of course, our goals are that every community, business, home, anchor institution has access to at least 100 by 20 service throughout the state, and that every investment that we're making is fully scalable at least to 100 symmetrical service. And so I think pairing those state and federal dollars, wisely, strategically moving forward is going to put us in a position, and I think states around the country in a position to look back and optimize this investment.
So, I'm tracking correctly with what Matt's saying. Right now, with the Illinois funds and then with the capital projects funds, you're in alignment across the board. Yeah. Unserved, underserved, focus on scalability. You're seeing that there may be some shifts in allocation if the infrastructure bill gets passed as it stands right now.
Right. I see very close alignment with the capital projects fund that was included in the American Recovery Plan Act. Very close alignment with state best practices, what we're doing in Illinois, with many states that have been doing this for the last decade are doing. I think with the infrastructure bill, it remains to be seen how close that alignment will be. But I think the key is, we welcome the investment. I think as we know as soon as possible, any limiting factors with those infrastructure dollars, it helps us plan in the meantime.
Of course. All right, Peter, sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, you're fine. So I was going to say, so we use a lower threshold. We use 25.3 as underserved if you're under that, and then unserved is if you're underneath 10.1. But from that perspective, we are using state dollars to be able to fund our first $250 million. So that's why we're able to use that. I always tell people too that 25.3 is a floor. You get points. You get more points if you're scalable and if you're going at higher speeds. So what does that mean though when we're talking about the capital improvements fund and what is that, or the capital projects funds or other ARPA dollars? Well, all that means is if there is an allocation that the legislature makes a decision and the governor, DeWine, and Lieutenant Governors used to make a decision to allocate those dollars, we'll make sure we track which ones are for which, right? So we'll make sure that we track which ones are from the from ARPA, and that they meet those requirements, and that any future funding round that may use ARPA dollars or the Capital Projects Fund will actually utilize the standards that are necessary. Because again, from our perspective, what we really needed was a process. We didn't have a process before. There really wasn't a way to get grant dollars out the door to be able to impact our communities. And that's what we've constructed, and that's what we're really working on. And we believe that that process is adaptable to any of the requirements that the federal government may give us for any of their federal funds.
Yes, and I think that reporting, the data tracking and showing that, you know, where money has gone into what, and also demonstrating the accountability of those funds. Are they actually doing what they were supposed to, is, you know, just so crucial. And I think an important lesson learned that hopefully we'll see other states adopting in the years to come. I also do want to draw people's attention to what Peter said as well about 25.3 being the floor. This is a really important shift in the field, and where we are no longer talking in many cases about those speed levels as being ceilings. We are hearing them being talked about as floors. So it's the base minimum of really what technology should be able to provide. And this all gets to, what are we building towards? What are we building once? Anyway, so not to put words in your mouth, Peter, but, you know, I appreciate you bringing up the point about the floor. So thank you.
Sure.
All right, so we have about 2 minutes left before we hand the microphone back over to Angie. If you have any concluding thoughts on anything that Illinois or Ohio communities or any other communities across the country, especially in the Heartland, should be doing to prepare for these incoming funds, please share them. Or if you have any other points that you'd like to make before we wrap, you have less than 2 minutes to do it. So Peter, hold on. I'm going to turn it over to Peter.
Okay, we'll go real fast. So the thing that I always say is, you know your communities better than I ever will. So Broadband Ohio is really interested in making sure that we can get out to your communities and get as much infrastructure built as possible to be able to bring high-speed internet to everyone. But I don't know where all the gaps are. As Matt said, it is the maps that we have right now are the beginning, they are not the end. So go to your communities, do speed tests, do work with Ookla or other companies that run those data sets. Work with the National Broadband Availability Map through the National Telecommunications Information Administration. Really find those areas of your communities that you know for sure are unserved and underserved, and then start talking about how we can make those projects a reality. Having shovel-ready projects is one of the most important things for our organization, and I'll leave it with that. So I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Great. So much to learn from you, Peter. So thank you. I would just say now is the time to lean into this conversation. It's the point that I made earlier. If you're a state broadband office that's setting up your operation, if you're a local community leader that's never really thought about broadband, or any kind of community engagement organization or stakeholder, now is the time to lean into this conversation. And so state broadband offices, hopefully across the country, will be standing up programming and resources to help communities. That's something that we're trying to be intentional about. And I think if you're at the community level and you have any questions, reach out to your Office of Broadband, engage in these sorts of forums, because this truly is a historic moment. If we seize it, we're going to be so much better off. And I just look at the competitive profile of our communities across the Heartland. We're going to be in great shape if we make smart investments.
I've got nothing else to add to that. So thank you so much, everyone. And Angie, back over to you.
Matt and Peter, you gave us some really good insights of what we should be thinking about for everyone that's on the phone call, that is actually doing the work on the ground, and people that are leading efforts at the federal level. I think a couple of things just to point out. Yes, this is a historic moment. We know that. First time in history that there is funding available, and how do we scale and accelerate making sure the funds go to the right places. Peter, I loved that you talked about we're still in the learning process, but we're learning really quick because we're trying to accelerate and get those shovel-ready projects out the door. But I also loved your comments around being transparent, and we've got to go through some funding rounds, and we got to share some best practices. So I love the conversation we're sharing between Ohio and Illinois today. but we want to share across the heartland. And Matt, you let us in to the conversation in a nice way about what we're about to talk about with some of our mayors in the heartland, but the investment that states need to make in communities, and how are we engaging and encouraging communities to tap into those resources. So I'm thrilled to introduce the next panel, those that will be joining me. First, I'd like for everyone to meet Mayor Emily Larson from Duluth, Minnesota. Next, Mayor Frank Scott Jr. from Little Rock, Arkansas, and Mayor Jim Strickland from Memphis, Tennessee. Mayors, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us on this very important issue, and can't wait to learn from you. We'll keep our state broadband office experts on the phone, so know this is your time to give some thoughts and advice to them as you're trying to deploy funding and get people connected in your communities. So we're just going to jump right in, if that sounds good to all of you. Great. So while your cities each have very unique challenges, we know that. I think that's what the state broadband office is, as we're thinking about the funding and how to push it out to communities. Every state has different levels of needs in different communities. All of you, though, have prioritized on how you're going to expand access to high-speed internet. I'd like to hear from each of you on sort of what have you prioritized, what have you accomplished so far? Mayor Larson, I'll start with you.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having us all. It's a really important conversation. I'm thrilled to be able to share what I know from Duluth, Minnesota. We are a community about 86,000 people. We're 2 hours north of the Twin Cities, and we are a regional center. So we provide all the healthcare, retail, shopping, education for really hundreds of thousands of people. And we are a destination, 6.7 million tourists a year. So we are a densely populated city. We are not underserved on the maps of broadband, but we are incredibly underserved in neighborhoods within our city. And it is hard for us to advance equity in broadband access and internet access because we appear to be served as primarily through a monopoly system. And so what we have been doing here in Duluth is really being bold about where we see the disconnects and what's happening. We have about 35% of our population has no reliable, consistent access to broadband or internet, 15% only through their phone, 20% not at all. Zero access. We have kids going to school this past year at, parking at a Subway so they can get access on their phones. So we have tremendous challenges. And what we've done is really chosen to use a policy path. So we have brought resolutions forward through the city council. We are prioritizing our ARPA funds, our American Rescue Plan funds, to invest and incentivize some competition in the market. We are engaged in a deep study with 20 different communities in our region around access points and what needs to be done to change and impact the market. And I've just really laid out and been very clear with the providers that we have locally that it isn't enough, that the access points aren't enough, that the investments aren't enough, that quite frankly, the sincerity behind them is just not quite enough. And so we're pushing our local providers as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. Really, really good thoughts and great work as you've gotten started. Mayor Scott, I would love to tell us a little bit more about Little Rock and what you're doing there.
Well, one of the things I want to kind of key in on from a Heartland perspective is that sometimes we may not realize or recognize that the Heartland has a number of different urban communities, like one of our sister and sisters in the city of Memphis and my dear friend, Mayor Strickland. And so many times when we think about broadband, we generally key in on affordability. But in most urban sectors and urban areas, and particularly large scale cities, with Little Rock being the largest city in a small state, we encounter a lot when it comes to digital equity, but particularly digital equity from an access standpoint and lack of access and affordability. And so when we think about the access and affordability component and what that drives in digital equity, many times urban areas are left out of the conversation. And so one of the things that we've been able to do in our partnerships with a host of organizations, but primarily Heartland Forward, Lead America, the Schusterman Foundation. We were able to, in a time of need, when many of us, when on March 11, 2020, when we all experienced this global pandemic and COVID-19, we found out where many of our disparities weren't just in healthcare. They were also financial disparities, but more importantly, we saw from an educational standpoint, we had a lot of broadband and digital equity issues, which created disparities within our low-income communities. And so one of the things that we were able to realize that 1 to 4 families had access and affordability issues within the city of Little Rock, the state's capital city. And so we were able to truly focus on partnerships and really creating a roadmap and an infrastructure to fund a lack of connectivity and able to get many of our students in our most at-risk schools and our most at-risk students to have connectivity through laptops and modems and things of that nature with the Schusterman Foundation, as well as with Heartland Forward. Moving from there and understanding that we had a wide gap in affordability, we had a wide gap in access, which created the digital equity issues. We were able to work with an organization like Heartland Forward to not only provide connectivity where there were affordability issues, to fill in and truly understand what equity means, and when we identify the issue and fill in those gaps. But we also knew that we had to continue to focus on the policy and the programmatic standpoint. And so we're very grateful that we were able to secure some help from a policy standpoint with our Chief Education Officer, Dr. Jay Barth, where we're able to work now with Heartland Forward to have funding for our very own digital equity policy fellow by the name of Ms. Maddie. And so we're definitely grateful for Maddie and also AmeriCorps from that standpoint to really fund that growth on policy, but also making sure that we have that infrastructure and understand the equity issues of affordability, which creates digital equity.
Mayor Scott, thank you so much. And yes, we're glad to be partnering with you, and love that you did a shout out to your Heartland fellow, Maddie. I know she's up and doing some great work, and look forward to hearing more. Mayor Strickland, tell us about Memphis. I know you've also talked, so all of you have mentioned, and Mayor, you've talked about that kind of rural urban and like where the money's going and what does that mean specifically for the city of Memphis. So would love to hear some thoughts from you as well.
Sure. See, I see the urban rural issue as actually an opportunity, because we have the same challenges. So we ought to all be lifting each other up, and I'll get to the funding in just a second, but we have the same challenges that Duluth and Little Rock have. Almost, it's very similar. If you look at Memphis, about 20% of our population does not have access, either from lack of infrastructure, a device, or knowledge. And the 80% who do have it, most of them have mediocre, less than top line service. Less than 10% have fiber to the premises. So our two goals are, number one, fiber to every premise, and number two, affordable service. I really do believe, the more I get into this, the more I really believe that if we can accomplish this, it's going to be as important to the quality of life and economic development as it was 100 years ago when they connected electricity to every premise and every business. I think it will be that revolutionary. And now we got a long way to go because it cost a lot. You know, when the American Rescue Plan first came out, it did not really allow urban cities to use that money for broadband infrastructure, and cities all gathered together, and or at least it was questionable at best. And the White House agreed, and they removed that question, and we can use it just like rural areas. But I'll give you one of our challenges. The state of Tennessee has allocated about $500 million from the American Rescue Plan for broadband throughout the whole state. But of our two goals, the first is broadband to the premises. They've allocated $400 million, but only rural areas of Tennessee qualify. The last $100 million, making it affordable, everyone qualifies per capita, so that's nice. But I hope when the bipartisan infrastructure plan, which I hope passes, I believe though it allocates all that money to the state for broadband. So we're going to work. We've already started laying the groundwork on saying, don't forget cities when you split up that money.
Yeah, that's great. And much more to come, right, on the infrastructure package and the hope of a final passage with a bipartisan approach for sure. So tell us a little bit. So you've shared some opportunities, you've mentioned some of the challenges, but I want to go a little bit deeper on some of the challenges that you're up against. And oh my goodness, this is such a amazing, crazy time, we could say. This is just one of many issues that as mayor you're faced with and dealing with. But what else do your communities need right now? Again, you have a lot of people listening in that are from industry, they're from local philanthropic organizations, they're from government entities, they're from other broader private sector organizations. If you had that magic wand, what would be the one or two, three things that you would ask for that you need right now to help close the digital divide in your community? Let's go in reverse order this time. Mayor Strickland.
I was not a realtor before I became mayor, but I'm going to give you a realtor's answer. Money, money, money. That's what we need. It's going to cost tens of millions of dollars to do what we need. And the philanthropic community in Memphis is working hand in hand with us. We have commissioned a strategic plan because you need a roadmap. You need a roadmap to show you how to do it. And that's supposed to be done actually this month. We've done some pilots in different areas of the city, which not only include giving people the devices and the infrastructure, but actually education along with how to use it. And those are working, and the philanthropic community has worked with us on that. But now it's time to go at scale. And with these federal funds, we can put real skin in the game. If we were just relying on the city's budget, we couldn't do much. But maybe, what our ask is from the business and philanthropic community in Memphis is that they could match us to some degree to get this broadband out there. Yeah,
and I think that there's a lot of people too, is what's that short term that we can really truly create those public-private partnerships. Mayor Scott, how about thoughts in Little Rock? Magic wand, what would you want?
Well, clearly, the answer is always money. But I think in this particular process, we have to understand the hands that we all are dealt. And so that's why it's even more imperative right now that it's more than just a public-private partnership. It's the philanthropic public-private partnership. So no longer is it a P3, it's a P4, because we have to bring everyone to the table who understands that these issues that we are dealing with are not only economic, but could create the opportunity for higher educational achievement. And so I think we have to lean in on digital literacy while we're talking about digital equity, with the understanding that both the rural-urban divide, but there's really no rural-urban divide. We have the issues that we all need to address within our respective communities. And the greater we can focus on digital equity, digital literacy, and understanding that we have the resources, not merely just from a city government perspective and a federal government, but also private sector as well as philanthropic. And as we create P4s to truly lean in on these areas of improvement that we all need, it's the betterment for our educational achievement. It's the betterment for economic empowerment. And also, if you have that great nexus between educational achievement and economic empowerment, it's also the reimagination of public safety. And I think that's something we have not really keyed in on. And I think that's how we're able to fundamentally change the game when we talk about digital literacy.
That's great. Mayor Larson, can I just add a couple of other layers to that question?
Yeah, please do.
So your magic wand, but I'd love to hear as like best practices, and Mayor Strickland and Scott jump in maybe after Mayor Larson, but we hear communities, they're putting their plans together with the staff that exists today, or they're putting their plans together with a nonprofit organization that is helping them, and they're putting their plans together because they're hiring a consultant and using some of those funds to do that. So, first, what is your magic wand? And then how have you set up kind of your infrastructure to make sure dollars get out the door and planning? I think that would be really helpful for our audience and other mayors probably across the Heartland to hear about.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was hoping to go there, actually. Anyway, a couple of the things that we've done when I talked earlier about getting, we've made this a policy priority. We have engaged the city council to also ratify that through different actions. It gives us the political basis upon which to make quick investments when we can. So, for instance, the ARPA funds we will be using to provide high-speed internet via our community centers. So we are using every tool that we have. And as a mayor, what I have is public space where everybody just gets to exist. And we have libraries and workforce centers. So we have used all three of those tools. And we're using the existing funding that we have and being creative about getting grants where we can get them. We're also working with Infosys and looking to launch greater digital training and equity and access here in Duluth, and utilizing a system that isn't just around, emphasis in what they can bring, but also our community college, our four-year college, our K-12. So I'm excited about what is already here that you can harness. And my advice would be to be really overt. This is also a very political issue, and to not be afraid to name the politics of it and to utilize that to your advantage. So use the political systems, whether that is your local council, your county board, your state legislature. My magic wand would actually be three things. It would be to allow the infrastructure bill to invest in cities like ours, because you're hearing that on the maps, we look served, but when you get into the neighborhoods, we are underserved. So to make some allowances for that and or to financially fill those gaps as businesses and investors on this call. The second would be to support allowing the regulation of this as a utility and as an industry, because that's what it is. This is no longer nice to have. It is a need to have. And there is something about it that I think deserves and merits kind of some public oversight and some process around which people can ensure there is equity in charges, equity in access. I can go into much greater detail about how much I think we're being underserved here, but the reality is that is just the experience right now, and it needs to be dealt with on multiple levels. And then the last thing, my last ask is, I would take one of those digital equity policy fellows in a heartbeat to work with us here and advance not just our internal working group that we have at the City of Duluth, but again, that 20 community, broader digital and broadband working group that we have going on, because we see this as, yes, rural urban tension, rural urban needs, but also rural urban opportunity and capacity building.
That's great. Okay, let's talk after this. The Fellows program is just getting started and growing, and we want to expand it across the Heartland. So
great, we are ready.
More to come on that for sure. So I'd love to also hear from each one of you. So we've talked a little bit about policy, and Mayor Scott, you mentioned policy. Well, you all have kind of mentioned it in your conversation. We've talked about policy at the federal level, and we're all anxiously awaiting what's going to happen. But I'm curious, what, as a mayor, are there any current kind of barriers at the state level or recommendations that you would give governor's office, state legislators about sort of what is still needed? I know we talk about at the state level, how do we think about modernizing our policies so communities can get dollars at the door. So Mayor Scott, I'll start with you if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts.
And sure, I think this is something that encompasses both the state and federal level. Many times, cities and municipalities, we are segmented in so many different ways where I can just give you an example. There was a period in time when we were the first CARES Act funding looked at cities different ways from a population standpoint. And so we as local mayors in CARES Acts 2 said, hey, you're leaving some of us out. Because of X number. And just because, for instance, Little Rock is the largest city in the state of Arkansas. We should have direct funding. We did not receive direct funding in the first CARES Act allotment. But we as mayors and many of part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors said, hey, you can't use us in a cookie cutter model. And so we received direct funding in CARES Act 2, which we all are very grateful for from that standpoint. And so that's one of the feedback is make sure whether state level or federal level, please work with the municipalities because we hear it first. We're on the ground. We understand what's going on. And so that's the first improvement is understanding populations. So we're 202,591. But many times we are compared to a city of Memphis that's close to, I think Mayor Strickland's around 1 million in Memphis proper from that standpoint. Same realities, difference in population, but we also, he's close to a quarter of what our state population is. And so when you understand that standpoint, I think we really have to talk with our governors, our congressional members, understand that each city is not a one size fit all from a policy standpoint. And so that's why we have to have tailor-made policy for municipalities from a digital standpoint. And that goes back to understanding the difference between rural and urban from that standpoint. Secondly, one of the things that we have to understand is that we have to share here in Arkansas, we have Digital Equity Act grants. And Governor Hutchinson has done a great job and really leaning in on broadband. And so we as cities have to continue to take advantage of these state grants that we're coming from most of the time from a federal government standpoint and utilizing that to go back to what we call the P4 and leveraging those dollars. And actually when that becomes, and now it's a P5 because you're including the state government in that standpoint. And so we have to get very creative with the allotments of dollars that are available to us so we can continue to build out the infrastructure, and particularly when we're looking at it from an equity lens. We in Little Rock have to focus on areas that we know there's low access, but also unserved, underserved historically, and how do we cure that through a greater focus on digital equity.
And if I could follow up on that, in addition to what Mayors Larson and Scott said, which a lot of it applies to Memphis, Tennessee, we have a unique issue. And I can identify the issue, and we've not resolved it though. There's a state law, state statute that really gives more authority in this arena to utilities, and we're still trying to work through that. Either way that legal research works out, we will probably be working hand in hand with our local utility, which is publicly owned, so that. Probably makes it a little easier, but they'll be an important partner in this.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I have a very specific, in building on what you both just said, but a very specific policy example that the state of Minnesota allows for small cell to just simply be added to rights of way for wireless capacity building. And while that was a law that I actually fought because I want municipalities to have as much influence and control over the right of ways within their designations as possible, that law did go through. So it allows for a lot of wireless expansion. However, one of the catches that we are finding is that same equity is not really being applied to the potential expansions of broadband internet and fiber or any other kind of connectivity thing. So for instance, building on some tension that can be there with the utility, we have a current I shouldn't say stumbling block, but the one current factor is our pole attachment agreements that have to be put into place with a local utility, for instance. So those are not mandated, governed, or regulated by the government in the same way that wireless and small cell development is. However, just as impactful, almost equally, if not more important, for market economy, competitiveness, education, job search, all the things. That's a very real stumbling area for us right now in Minnesota. And I think that is one that will become much bigger as people begin to understand the role of rights of way and how that can impact points of access.
Yeah, that hit on actually a question we just got from a member of the audience, just talking about that. How are we making sure the technology and infrastructure is truly equitable and preventing that digital redlining and like how you manage to do that, and that can happen through policy, to your point, and really understanding the different needs of that. So unfortunately, we are getting sort of close to time. I want to close with just a couple of thoughts. You all are, like I said, this is one of many issues that you focus on and are leading your community. You are also mayors that since the day you started have been looking towards the future. You're aspiring to make your communities better. You're working to create economic success for all of your communities. So tell us, if you had the advantage point of your city operating 100% of your constituents were online, what would that mean for your community? What would you do? What would the advancements be able to make as it relates to some of your other goals and initiatives you have going on in your community? Mayor Strickland.
Sure, just briefly, number one, we could communicate with our citizens so much better about city services. And number two, we could really implement our Memphis 3.0 plan, which is our first comprehensive plan in 45 years, where we're trying to push investment, private investment in areas that have been forgotten. But without broadband infrastructure, the private sector is going to be they'll limit themselves in investing. But if you open the door to that, we'll get some investment in areas that have been forgotten.
I think one of the things that we have to mention is when we have this greater access to broadband and just our whole entire digital environment, our city's potential are limitless. We're opening the door for entrepreneurship. We're opening the door for education. We're opening the door for greater access to data for we as policymakers to truly make accurate, precise, and timely decisions that are data driven. And we're able to have constant feedback and communication that we are able to provide a greater customer service, but our customers are able to really tell us what's on their mind real time, and we're able to make those type of decisions, betterment of our and ultimately our.
Yeah, and I'll just add that to me, I smiled a little bit when you asked the question because I'm so excited for that day when we get there, and we will get there. There's no doubt in my mind. It will be very difficult. It will be costly. It will be completely worth it because then cities really can become more communities of choice. We have people who move here from across the country. It's so beautiful to live here, and to imagine, the expansion of people who are working from home, learning from home, living at home, who really need that kind of connection. It really expands our ability to be a stronger community of choice for people, which I'm excited about. But I also come from the workforce development field, and so what I really look forward to is the ability for us to be even more competitive in a market economy that is driven on continual improvement of skills, awareness of technology, swift and smooth utilization of it. We are communities, all of ours, that can be leaders. We are leading in so many different ways. But to be really honest, our residents deserve this. I mean, our businesses deserve it, our entrepreneurs, our dreamers deserve it, but our residents really deserve access. Access makes our lives better. I don't think any one of us on this panel, this call, this workshop would feel comfortable not having access and not being able to afford it. That's not right. That's not who we are as a country. We're capable of so much better and so much more.
What a great way to close. I completely agree. We thank you for your leadership and your support of advancing your communities, of sharing best practices, We hear you loud and clear. One, infrastructure, please come, pass more funding. Let's all work together to get this done, and let's make it better for our communities, for our constituents. So you all are very, very busy people. Thank you, Mayor Larson, Mayor Strickland, and Mayor Scott. It's been fun visiting with you. We could have probably kept this conversation going for much longer, but definitely look forward to being in touch. Thanks for sharing your insights, and we'll definitely talk soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, what a great discussion from the mayors that joined us, and just building upon what we know is coming down from the federal level, what our state broadband offices are talking about, and what those mayors and communities actually need. I'm pleased to introduce and have Blair Levin join us now. We're just going to kind of, I'll use the word, we're going to unpack what we just heard, and what we heard was coming. Blair, I haven't been looking at the headlines during this session, so you're going to fill us in too if there's anything that's happened in the last hour or so that this group needs to know about. Many of you have worked alongside Blair over the years, and if you don't know him, has spent a number of years in senior roles at the FCC and went on to oversee the creation of the National Broadband Plan back in 2010. He's remained deeply, deeply engaged. He's not only, he advises, he's working on a number of things as an advisor and analysis, and has become a great thought leader as Heartland Forward works and engages on these issues across the Heartland. So Blair, good to see you today. Oh, and I think you're on mute.
I am, but no more. Thank you.
All right. Well, so let's just tell me anything that you heard today. I mean, and you're part of a lot of these conversations, but anything today that you heard from our state leaders, our local leaders, that sort of surprised you, or that you want to kind of dig in deeper on?
So a couple of things. First, in terms of news flashes, I think there now has been a deal in the House so that the infrastructure bill will pass on Monday. Not 100% certain, but certainly looks that way. And I think that when you look at what the mayors were asking for, a lot of it is in the legislation, not 100%, but we're going to move to what you talked about at the very beginning. This is an historic opportunity to solve problems that we've all known for a long time. I have to say, and I don't know whether I'm saying this analytically or emotionally, the difference between the awareness of the mayors about the importance of these issues between now and between 2010, when we were doing the National Broadband Plan, it is huge. And people in Washington often use the I word to describe how something got accomplished. It's never true. Politics and policy is always a team sport. And what I saw and heard from the state representatives and the mayors is there is now a really excited, smart, able group of people ready to tackle these issues. That is there were reasons that wasn't true in 2010. It's great that it's true now because the big opportunity is there. Foundations like yours played a big role in doing it. I think, frankly, COVID played a big role in making sure everyone was aware of it. But it's going to be a very exciting couple of years, also a very hard couple of years. And I think, when you listen particularly to the state folks, I think you had two of the best examples. Kathryn would know better than me which are the best and which are the worst. But there are a number of states, and even Ohio, which is very good. He just joined a year ago. Mm-hmm. And those people are going to be making decisions about hundreds of millions of dollars. In some cases, $1 billion+ dollars, and they don't have the background to do it as well as they want. And I thought there was a very important line about how do you recognize when an application is really good and you can approve it right away because time is of the essence. That's the kind of thing that, frankly, we're missing. Mm-hmm. But I think, things like what the Heartland Foundation is doing, what the Pew Foundation is doing, is trying to raise up all the states so that they can have that recognition. That's going to be really, really critical. It's also going to be critical at the federal level to understand when can you approve an application like that and when can you say, wait a minute, we're noticing something here. So I think that's a big issue. But overall, I thought the comments were very thoughtful. But it's really about the recognition of the historic importance of this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I thought the comment of, we're just getting started. It's a learning process. I mentioned it earlier, but I also think the transparency is so very important. And it's great to see state leaders saying, no, we're going to be transparent. We're going to expect, others across the industry and across other stakeholders to also be transparent so we can really work together and get things done. Tell us though, Blair, okay, so say Monday happens, the bill passes. What's next? Like what, if I'm sitting in a state broadband office or I'm sitting in a mayor's office, what are the next steps that they're thinking about as we prepare for sort of the rulemaking process and all of that to happen? Walk us through that as much as we might know today.
Yeah, well, there's one thing that has to happen. And when you said about the magic wands and the wish list, there's certainly something that I would have added to that, and that's good maps. Nothing happens from the infrastructure bill perspective until the FCC produces a good map. A lot of the states are working on their own maps. The FCC is doing its own map. NTIA has some map. There's some private efforts. But as we sit here today, none of those maps are adequate to justify the expenditure of money. And that's something that Congress put in. I think they were wise to do so. So I think the first thing that has to happen is a lot more activity to quickly finish up that mapping process. I think that will happen, but we still don't have a head of NTIA. We still don't have a permanent head of the FCC. So there are certain things that, and I think we'll get mapping before we have those people, by the way. But mapping is certainly one. Then there's a schedule that's actually outlined in the legislation for how quickly NTIA can open up the window to do the applications, the process for doing the applications, the process for challenging, reviewing, et cetera. That is laid out. It's interesting. The rescue plan that created the Treasury Capital Fund, where you just had final rules, that came out early in the year. The final rules just came out, so that gives you an idea that kind of like final rules often take 6 months. There's a lot of back and forth. One of the interesting things in the discussions was the difference between trying to serve rural areas where the fundamental problem is putting in a network where there's no network or where there's a very inadequate network, and the problem of cities where you have small pockets, and you talked about redlining. There are these pockets where you have networks, but you don't have very good networks, or you have some good expensive network, but no other kind of networks. You have, but the biggest problem being affordability. There's a number of different things that have to happen. But the key thing, I think, is for the states, and I think you saw that in everybody's comments, as well as the mayors, to understand once in a generation opportunity. One of the mayors, I think, compared it to the importance of electricity. This is the moment where we're doing a surge. As a country, we're having a surge of financing to do two very big things. Number one, get future-proof networks everywhere. And number two, get everybody on those networks. The federal government's fundamentally spending the money, but Congress said we want the state and local governments to really be responsible for determining how to spend the money, with some oversight from the federal government.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the mapping. I mean, we all know we can't have a broadband discussion without talking about mapping, but I mean, it's so true. We can't have, a bill that passes and then mayors and states sitting around and saying, but I still don't really know, I still don't have the right map. And it's just, you hate to see efforts duplicated as states having to go and do their own. So I know that that's something that's a top priority for many, both at the state and federal level. Talk a little bit about we mentioned kind of the rural urban discussion with the mayors, and then lots of conversations around, yes, we know affordability is an issue and will continue to be. Yes, we know that infrastructure is, but there's a lot of discussion around this digital literacy and education. Share with us what you think. We're funding, more funding on that piece will happen. Do you have examples of, groups and organizations that are lifting this up and doing it right? Share some thoughts on that.
So just the order of magnitude in terms of money in the infrastructure bill, approximately $42+ billion going to deployment to underserved areas. Approximately $14.5 billion going to what's called the Affordable Connectivity Benefit, where we'll be subsidizing low-income people $30 a month to get broadband. That's not a permanent solution. Congress asked the FCC to come up with a permanent solution, but it's a long runway. It's order of magnitude 2 to 5 years of funding on top of some other funding that already exists. And then you have $2.5 billion for what's called digital equity and inclusion. Those are the digital literacy training programs. That doesn't sound like as much money relative to the other programs. But I have to tell you, from the perspective of one who has worked with a number of organizations who were thrilled to get $100,000 grants, to do this kind of work, it is a huge surge of money for that kind of program. So you have a number of organizations. The national one is the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which is essentially a federation of literally hundreds of organizations working on that. All of those organizations are going to be eligible for funding at a level that they've never had before. The big question, as always, is can they scale up? Deployment, there was some discussion about supply chains. It's exactly right. Can you get the fiber? Can you get the construction crews? Can you get the human oversight of it? Certainly in adoption, there's a number of things that you have to do, but the literacy is the most complicated to scale. So the question is, can you get these organizations to develop very effective programs? I think there are a lot of models out there in various communities. There needs to be a lot of sharing of information. And also on my magic wand wish list would be to get businesses and philanthropic communities in cities in particular to understand this is the moment, this is the surge. If we don't do it now, we'll never do it. By the end of this 3 to 5 year period, nobody should not be online because they don't know how to utilize it. So that's a critical function, maybe the most difficult one. I'm not sure we need more money, but we need more focus.
Yeah. And that's why I love these discussions, because it's bringing the doers across the country that are trying to get things done to accelerate progress and economic development for our communities. Blair, we are right at time. Thank you for sharing some of your thoughts and insights. I hope we are all excited and celebrating next week. And that just means, though, we're rolling up our sleeves to do much more work. And but I do think kind of
I thought your last question was fantastic, because that's really what this is. It's not really about the networks. It's not really about getting everybody, but what do we do with it? And I love the mayor's comment about we're capable of so much more. We're capable of so much better. That should be the vision. Thank you so much for having this discussion.
Yep, I will leave it at that. We are capable. We're a strong country. We're a strong heartland. Thank you, everyone that has followed the workshop series. More to come from Heartland Forward. We also want to hear from you, because we want to be transparent. We want to share best practices. So share the great work that you're doing, and let's keep collaborating and working together. So hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thanks for joining us.